Hello weirdos, today I'm going to be talking about the best monster myths and stories that I could find from Antarctica. So, disclaimer on this video, I'm going to be talking about some more sensitive topics like death, mutilation, child sacrifice in the last story. Now before I get into it, these stories come from like eyewitnesses, and basically all these stories are just kind of like maybe not necessarily real, but many do believe they're true, so whatever you want to think. So let's get into it. Starting off with the Ningen. So I've always liked the Ningen. I think it's a really cool legend, and I feel like it's overlooked by most people. The Ningen is said to be a sea monster that resembles a human and a whale mixed. Alleged eyewitnesses describe them as being roughly 65 to 100 feet long and having long, flat fins, or even sometimes having very human-like arms with even 5 fingers on each hand. Which, keep in mind, the largest animal in the world that's known, not including the Kraken, is the blue whale, right at 98 feet long. So, a lot like whales, the Ningen are said to have large whale-like tails. Their only identifiable facial features are their 2 eyes lacking thought and their slit-like mouth. And supposedly, they inhabit the sub-Antarctic Ocean, where they were allegedly discovered by a Japanese research vessel. Or were made up online. You decide. So, we don't know for sure when the first alleged Ningen sighting was, but the legend surrounding the Ningen began in 2002 on a forum post on this Japanese website called 2channel. And this is what this post said, roughly translated from Japanese to English. The whaling research surrounding the Antarctic Sea, conducted by the Japanese government, is not only conducting research on the whales they catch, but also researching whales they cannot catch. In the last few years of research, it's said that some objects that cannot be officially announced have been witnessed. I've gotten information directly from a person involved. These are what's called among whale researchers as human-shaped objects. Now, they go on about how there's several types of them, such as one that looks like a human with 4 limbs and a head, and then one that looks as if it's 2 humans with their upper bodies joined. They emerge from the water just like whales. The whole body is white, and the size is a few tens of meters long. I heard that nobody had seen such a thing before us. When they were conducting whaling years ago, they all were really baffled at it because an official announcement of these creatures could overturn the credibility of all current whale research. For now, they're just recording them, but that doesn't mean that they are vigorously conducting research on them, as they have to submit all the research to an international committee that doesn't have much time for them. The person who told me this said, "You can tell others this information, but please keep me anonymous, although I'm pretty sure other people are already telling this story too. That's all I know for now." So from this post, we can assume that if this is real, there are some really strange whale-like human creatures in the ocean near Antarctica. They mention how they're a few tens of meters long, which could be anywhere between 65 to 130 feet long, which is huge and even bigger than a regular whale. So one type of the human objects, as they called it, has 4 limbs and a head. So it makes me think that it was just like a giant human in the water, unless they meant that it was more like a whale tail having the 2 extra fins as limbs. I think that's what they maybe meant. And the other one looks as if it was 2 humans joined at the upper body, so like some freaky conjoined twin-looking whale man. Why am I making this video? But from the story, we can assume that they're not releasing this information because it would make their entire research institution and findings invalid due to contradictions. So on this same forum, another individual was also claiming that they were a member of another whaling research ship that witnessed the creature as it surfaced near their ship off the coast of Antarctica. This user claimed to be an employee of the government on a research vessel, and they said how when they encountered this mysterious creature, the entire crew initially assumed it was a foreign submarine. However, this massive unknown object moved closer to them, and the crew realized that it was alive. But then, after they caught a glimpse of it, it disappeared into the water. This 2chan thread got a lot of popularity and even more attention when MU, which is this Japanese magazine focusing on the paranormal, featured an article on the Ningen in a 2007 issue. In this article, the magazine also published a picture that looked like it was from Google Maps that is supposedly supposed to be the creature in the ocean. Checkmate, atheists. I'm pretty sure people have confirmed that this picture is faked, but maybe it's not. So most Ningen sightings seem to almost always occur at night, which makes them really difficult to photograph. And most of the time, the Ningen-like object just looks like ice, but sometimes it looks as if it has smooth skin if you zoom in on the picture. But in any case, no convincing pictures of the Ningen have been made public. Except for this picture. It's really convincing. I think it's real. And whether that's because they don't exist or because, as some argue, the government doesn't want this information to surface because of tarnishing the scientific reputation, I'll leave that for you guys to decide. It was probably just a whale though, to be honest, but I really like the idea. So there's also this weird Japanese folklore back in like the 1700s called the Ningayo that some people like to speculate is what the Ningen story came from. The Ningayo is like this human fish thing, or more of like a mermaid. The fish creature is said to have a monkey's mouth, small fish teeth, golden scales, and a quiet flute-like voice. And because this is a Japanese legend, of course they talk about eating it. So the Ningayo tastes delicious, and eating it will greatly add to a person's lifespan. However, catching one is said to bring storms and misfortune on the person. So don't catch and eat the fish person. One more thing about the Ningen real quick before we move on. I found this conspiracy theory I really liked that said that like the Ningen is being covered up by the government because the creature can produce a rare chemical compound that has medicinal purposes, or that it produces a highly venomous substance that the government intends to weaponize. So, you know, they want the Ningen juice. Understandably. Anyways, that's the story of the Ningen. Moving on to another one. Organism 46b. Now, I've done a video on this before, but I just thought I'd add this in here because it's just a really cool story and I want to talk about it again. Organism 46b is this alleged aquatic beast thing captured by Russian scientists in Antarctica near the research outpost Vostok Station. It was described as basically being this giant 14-tentacle squid octopus thing that was incredibly intelligent and could release poison in the water that hypnotizes its prey. And like even its limbs were dangerous, even when they were severed from the rest of its body. So a few things. The settings of this legend are true. There's this kind of mind-blowing super deep lake under Antarctica ice called Lake Vostok, and a lot of things about this lake are still a huge mystery. For instance, we know this lake is well below the freezing point, but it doesn't freeze. And we theorize that's because of the massive amount of pressure that's put on the lake, which changes its melting point. But what we don't know is exactly how deep the lake is and all the different living creatures that are in there. Because something like this could have a complete different ecosystem than anything else in the entire world, and it would be completely isolated. We estimate it's roughly 1,700 to 3,000 feet deep, but we still don't know for sure. So you can see how a crazy story about this mysterious lake and its inhabitants would strike a massive amount of interest from the rest of the world, and even make some people think it was really real. And it's worth noting that the Organism 46b legend is widely believed to just be a fun story written by some guy, Michael Forsyth, who wrote it and did such a good job on it that everyone thought it was real. Although some people do believe that the story actually is real and that the Russian government basically made it appear to look like a story as a cover-up. So I'm just leaving that out there, but here's the story. So the tale is told in the form of a whistleblower speaking out on something he experienced while on a research mission. Dr. Padalka is telling the public of the horrors he encountered on a classified trip 12,366 feet beneath the Antarctic ice. That is insanely deep. According to the story, the reason it's classified is because the Russian government hopes to weaponize what they found. Dr. Anton Padalka claims that he had been part of the first scientific expedition to explore Lake Vostok. We encountered Organism 46b on our first day. It disabled our radio, which we later learned, to our alarm, was intentional. It is also able to paralyze prey from a distance of up to 150 feet by releasing venom into the water. Tragically, my colleague and lifelong friend was killed this way. Later, Dr. Padalka's research team was diving in this lake and they were attacked by the creature where it released its venom, which took hold of one of the researchers. The organism then proceeded to eat and kill his colleague. Padalka stated, "He tread water, wearing a blissful smile as the organism approached him. We watched helplessly as it used its arms to tear off his head and then pop its remains into its mouth. It was as if it had hypnotized him telepathically." A little while later, they found out that this intelligent octopus monster thing was also incredible at shapeshifting, not unlike other regular octopuses. He goes on, "It shaped itself into the form of a human diver. We thought it was one of my colleagues swimming towards us in scuba gear. By the time the closest scientists had realized what was going on, it grabbed him and tore him to bits." So, as Dr. Padalka and his team attempted to escape this creature, one of his team members managed to lop off one of the organism's tentacles with an axe. However, the severed limb attacked the group. He said, "Later that night, it slid across the ice bank while we slept and strangled the girl that had severed it." And so now the scientists believe that not only can the octopus regenerate its limbs, but that the severed tentacles actually have brains and that they can even possibly form an entirely new creature. So the story goes on to tell about how the scientists stopped looking at the octopus as having the intelligence of an average animal, but started to look at it as being as smart as the average human. And so with their combined knowledge with all their PhDs between all the scientists, they somehow miraculously captured this 33-foot smart octopus in a tank. And then the 5 surviving scientists made their way up to the surface and plugged the hole in the ice that they descended into the lake through. So then, according to the story, the Russian government was like, no, we didn't find anything. And then Dr. Badalka fled Russia after finding out that they were planning to put his team's discovery to military use. He said, some species of octopus lay 200,000 eggs. Imagine if they were deposited in reservoirs and lakes across North America. The story goes on about how he's currently hiding, and that's why people theorize that this story is true, and that it's a cover-up to hide the truth. And yeah, basically, that's the story of Organism 46B. On one hand, if it was a cover-up, they totally could just, like, make it a story and then be like, yeah, this guy made it up, and we would never really know anything better than that. However, it is pretty far-fetched, but let's get into something that's not so far-fetched. Prehistoric giant monster spiders in Antarctica. Alright, so there's this other Antarctica legend that's really, really insane. Guys, I am not saying this is true, but this is the story. So basically, this anonymous user claimed his dad worked in Antarctica and that all kinds of crazy things happened, including a giant Stranger Things-like spider monster always attacking people around his base. For all we know, this could be just completely made up, so just take it all as a story. But some do think it's pretty legitimate, and the guy kind of put some proof, but not really. But do your own research, but anyways, here we go. So back in 2021, a thread on 4chan had this image posted in it, which appeared to be this giant spider-like creature in Antarctica that someone had allegedly found on Google Earth. And so when everyone was trying to figure out what this thing was, an anonymous user came out claiming that his father was a doctor working at McMurdo Station in Antarctica, and that he knew about these things and what they were. And the following were the posts from this user before he went silent. So the guy posting all this stuff calls himself Ant Anon. I am the foremost expert on this subject. My father was stationed in Antarctica at McMurdo Station. He told me things. Y'all want to hear some messed up stuff? I'm using a fake name because it's easier for me to keep track of all this. Some background. My father was a doctor stationed for 11 months in the 90s. Not saying what year because he was the only doctor there and y'all could track me down. Frequently went out on scientific expeditions. First and foremost, there were some areas people just do not go. They weren't environmentally hazardous, they just were avoided for one reason or another. When my dad asked one of the researchers who had been there for 10 years, he went pale and told him to shut up. It was about 30 miles south, 10 east of McMurdo. They took a 5-mile detour around whatever the heck was there. Anton goes on about how there are these giant spider things there that they called the Striders. And the Striders were these big 5-legged things that crawled across the continent only at night or during low visibility in a snowstorm. He also mentioned that only military personnel sighted them there, but that all the workers there had been threatened to keep silent about all of those creatures. But then he goes on about how his dad actually had a Polaroid picture of the tracks that these creatures had made, saying that the tracks were 30 to 40 feet apart, which would probably be much larger than the creature from the original picture would have made, I would assume. So later, Antonon tells about how his dad tried to find out more information about the giant spider things, and his superior yelled at him, not wanting him poking around. Another time, Antonon's dad tells about how a person who wasn't from his base came in with extensive injuries saying he just fell. But the injuries this guy had were like really clean lacerations, and we can probably assume they were from the giant spider things. But then, as Antonon's dad began to treat him, he became more and more delirious, saying something about how they accidentally let these things loose and that we thought they were dead, frozen in the ice. And apparently, the guard there tried to shut up the injured guy by gagging him, even though he was only breathing through a face mask. And rightfully so, the doctor got mad and was like, no, you can't do that, and took it off. And then the soldier got upset and threatened him and then locked the doctor, Antonon's dad, in his room until the injured guy had been taken off the base and flown home. So anyways, as this anonymous user was posting all this, other people were very reasonably very skeptical. They asked for proof of the stuff he was saying, and he posted a picture of his father's plaque to prove it. And the plaque does look pretty realistic. Antonon goes on about how his father was out in the field driving with some colleagues one day when they hit a large creature. And when he got out of his vehicle to see the damage, Antonon was horrified to see a creature that looked like a Stranger Things monster. The spider-looking monster thing had been completely killed by the vehicle and was obviously dead, but before he even had time to barely look at the creature, a soldier rushed him back into the car and told him to shut up and not talk about what he had just seen. So from all this stuff so far, we can assume that Antarctica is not off limits because they want to preserve the continent, but that the government had found these ancient prehistoric spider creatures that they thought were dead, and then they thawed them and they turned out to be alive, and then they've been terrorized by these monsters all over the continent, and yeah, now Antarctica has a huge monster problem. Antonon goes on about how the death toll in Antarctica is secretly much higher than people think. He tells of all these horrible cases of people out in the field being ripped limb from limb, and then left in the snow to freeze. Then, Antonon's father would have to wait for their bodies to thaw even before he could sew them up to send them home to their families. But there was another occasion when a person showed up who Antonon's father didn't think worked at the base. He was hurt so badly that basically his entire lower half of his body was just gone, and his intestines were going all over the place, and obviously he died, and Antonon's father had to do his best to seal up this guy because they couldn't find the rest of his body, and send him back to his family. What's even worse about this is he noted that the man who died didn't even die a quick death, and that he was basically scratched apart from his ribcage down, and that his death was covered up as being from hypothermia. I'm sure his family will believe that. Antonon goes on to tell about how all these Arctic warfare officers and scientists really did die super frequently, and on one occasion he found a journal on one of these men who had passed. The journal contained deeply detailed diagrams and descriptions of animals that didn't exist. This caused Antonon's father to confront another researcher about all this new information, but she stiffened up and refused to answer anything. Just hours later, Antonon's father was given a final warning that if he didn't stop pressing for answers, he would be shipped back to the US. But as soon as his base's commanding officer was gone for the day, he decided to go through his things looking for answers. He went into the commander's office and he found hundreds of documents on operations that had taken place, experiments that they had been secretly conducting over and over again with detailed results, and figured out that this base had been used to create and perfect military-grade animals to be used in warfare, and that he himself had been part of this operation the entire time and had no idea. While he was in the office rummaging through this guy's stuff, a whole bunch of officers suddenly came into the office and detained Antonon's father because he knew too much. He was scheduled to be shipped back to the United States in just a few days, but right before he left, a man named Jones shook him awake. Jones started to tell Antonon's father about this mission he had just been on the day before. He said he had just gotten back from an expedition with some researchers, but he said this wasn't a normal mission. Instead of taking the average military car they usually took, they took a truck with an M134 minigun and brought tons of other weapons with them. He talks about how they began to head deeper into the continent to that area where they always avoided at the beginning of the story, where they then arrived at something that looked like an office building. In this office building, Jones said that it was actually a Chinese government lab that had clearly been attacked by something. Once inside, Jones said there was bodies everywhere, but when they got to the basement, they found tunnels leading to an even more large and secret lab. In this underground lab, they found cages that were busted open, strange, unfamiliar technology, and even more bodies. But Jones said that this was all part of something much bigger. The tunnels they had found weren't actually just for getting to that lab, but were used by bullet trains which ran to all kinds of places all over the world like Hong Kong, New York, Melbourne, London, but also that one of these cages in the lab had one of the prehistoric spider monsters still inside, with the remnants of a human child. So these creatures basically fed on children from all over the world right under our noses, and we had no idea, according to this random story. So in this story, the Chinese bases were being used as a human trafficking ring, with the victims being fed to these man-made creatures created for war. Jones then tells about how it took like 18 hours to clear out the facility of all the stuff that was in there, and that was all the information that he had. So Antonon's father believed that these creatures that had been frozen during the Ice Age were the absolute apex predators of the world before they were frozen. But now, we had somehow thawed them and altered their biology somewhat to do our will, but that they kind of failed doing the bending them to our will thing. And also, why did they have to eat children? Why wouldn't they just feed them any other animal? That would be a lot cheaper and easier than running trains all the way across the entire world. That seems nearly impossible. Unless these creatures only ate children, because back in the day they were the apex predator and just devoured human children. That's kind of a scary thought. Antonon's father was then flown back to the US, where he was court-martialed for his crimes of snooping, but he never signed an NDA and was free to go. And overall, this entire story has somehow been hid from the rest of the world until his son decided to post it all on 4chan in 2021. Funny thing, there actually is this real thing called a giant Antarctic sea spider that's real. It's about a foot long and it only lives at the depths deeper than 5,900 feet, which is really freaky, but I thought I would add that, so moving on. Alright, the Julia sea monster sound. So, I'm sure a lot of you guys know about the bloop noise, and Julia is incredibly similar. Real quick, if you don't know what the bloop is, it was a nickname given to an ultra-low frequency that was recorded in the ocean. And back in the day, the NOAA basically said that this was probably like a massive sea creature for a long time, but later on they decided that it was more likely just ice breaking. But a lot of people still do hold on to the idea that it was like a giant sea creature monster thing. I like that idea. But Julia is pretty much the same thing. It's the name given to a sound heard in the ocean and the waters near Antarctica. What's kind of creepy is they named it Julia because it sounded eerily similar to a woman's voice underwater, and it also sounds like it's saying Julia if you listen to it right. It was captured in 1999 by the NOAA's hydrophones, which are like these microphones that they have all over the ocean to listen to underwater events. And it sounded like this. It was actually so loud that it could be heard for over 3,000 miles, and the sound lasted for 15 seconds. It's believed to have came from the tip of Antarctica. What's kind of interesting is the bloop sound and the Julia sound were both recorded in the kind of the same region, and while scientists say that both of them were likely just ice breaking and rubbing against other ice, others like to speculate on something more interesting. So there's this kind of conspiracy theory where some claim that a NASA satellite called the 33A5 satellite showed a large image in the water at the time of the recording in the same area, and that there was actually classified pictures that show a massive shadow 2 times larger than the Empire State Building moving around. However, some people claim that this is just a conspiracy or misinformation, which I obviously enjoy spreading. Just watch my videos. So that's all I got for Julia. I will say overall, besides like the deep ocean, I feel like Antarctica has to be the most eerie and mysterious place in the world. Like, it's so weird that like all the world governments got together and were like, yeah, no one nation can own this place. We all need to share it. But at the same time, they told people that they just can't go there alone. I find that insanely weird. Like, I heard this one guy, I don't know if this is completely true. Like, obviously, it's really important to like protect the coastal areas in Antarctica because like the penguin population is really sensitive and there's like an ecosystem there that needs to be protected. But this guy was talking about how like the center of Antarctica is just like a desolate wasteland, and they still protect it like it's like the most fragile thing ever, but it's like there's nothing there, allegedly. So for some reason it's still off limits, or you have to have like extreme supervision to go to these areas. And to this day, planes still aren't allowed to fly over Antarctica, which I find weird. They just say it's because of the strong magnetic fields. Anyways, I'm glad I got to do this video because I've always been really interested in Antarctica and just all the mysteries there since I was a young boy. So hopefully, if you like this stuff too, you enjoyed this. If you're here, thank you for watching the entire video. You're probably deranged, just like me. So thank you for watching. Also, thank you guys for 270,000 subs. Subscribe if you want to. I probably don't deserve the subscribers I have right now, but thank you anyways. But if you want to talk about more weird stuff just like this video, just join my Discord because it's kind of inactive, but there's a lot of people in there. But just come join and talk about stuff with me. Anyways, thank you guys, have a great day, and don't drink the Ningen juice.